Before Disney purchased Star Wars, the expanded universe was extremely large and varied. There were masterpieces like the Thrawn trilogy of novels, which will forever be my episodes 7, 8, and 9, solid spin-offs like the Boba Fett Enemy of the Empire comics, and cultural events like Shadows of the Empire, which spanned several mediums. The subject of today's video was released 3 years after Revenge of the Sith and was the first significant story of the era between the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy. Disney has recognized this era as fertile ground for storytelling, as it's been the setting for Rogue One, Solo, and what I think is the best project to come out of modern Star Wars, Dave Filoni's follow-up to the Clone Wars, Star Wars Rebels. Rebels follows a young Jedi Padawan named Ezra Bridger, whose master Kanan eventually loses his eyesight and who, together with the small crew of a Millennium Falcon-esque ship, plays an integral part in forming the Rebel Alliance. While Rebels' take on these events is very different, all of this has happened before in one of George Lucas's own major expanded universe events, the event that was spearheaded by the incredible third-person action game, Star Wars: The Force Unleashed. The first Force Unleashed game was released in 2008 for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, with the PC version releasing the following year, as well as stripped-down ports for the PS2, PSP, Nintendo Wii, Nintendo DS, iOS, and even the Nokia N-Gage. For the purpose of this video, we'll be looking at the PC version, as it should be no surprise that it's the easiest one to acquire in 2019. You're also only a few short Google searches or a gander at this video's description for links which will help you mod the game to run in 4K at 60 frames a second. The Force Unleashed tells the story of Darth Vader's secret apprentice Starkiller, who is played by the awesome Sam Witwer of Days Gone, Frank Darabont's The Mist, as well as the voice of half the Sith Lords on the animated shows. Not to be confused with the Force Awakens Starkiller base, or the original last name of Luke Skywalker, you find this Starkiller during the intro mission, where you play as Darth Vader on the Wookiee homeworld of Kashyyyk, hunting down the remaining Jedi after Order 66. Vader kills a young boy's Jedi father, and instead of doing what little Annie does best, adopts the boy and secretly trains him in the ways of the dark side. This might seem like a contrived way to add a very powerful Force user who we've never heard of into the mix, but the team at LucasArts did a great job at paying attention to the Star Wars canon and making Starkiller's story fit seamlessly into the tale being told by the original 6 films. Vader, like any good Sith Lord, is crafting a long-term plan to overthrow the Emperor and take his place as Master of the Sith with Starkiller as his apprentice. This fits well, as at this point in the story, Vader has no idea that his children are alive, so he would not know that he'd have a son or daughter to tempt to the dark side a few short years later. For the first few missions of the game, this tale of villainy is played straight, with Starkiller being given a Millennium Falcon-style ship and a small crew of himself, a pilot named Juno Eclipse, and a droid named Proxy, who can essentially function as a holographic FaceTime phone, with which he has to hunt down any Jedi who have evaded Order 66. And they don't sugarcoat it, you kill some Jedi. A quarter of the way into the game, things go awry, the Emperor becomes aware of Starkiller, and Vader appears to betray and kill his apprentice by throwing him out into space. Unlike Leia Poppins, Starkiller does not save himself, but is recovered by one of Vader's droids and his body is rebuilt, not unlike Vader's was. It's here that a plot bomb is dropped. Vader's plan is to let the Emperor think Starkiller is dead and have him organize a rebellion in secret in order to form an army capable of causing a war which will keep Palpatine distracted.
Did I just blow your mind?
After this, Starkiller joins forces with a blind Jedi Master named Rom Kota, and his small crew sets out to form the Rebel Alliance. While I liked Rebels quite a lot, and I think that the scene where Ahsoka and Vader meet at the end of Season 2 is right up there with the best moments of the original trilogy.
I won't leave you. Not this time.
Then you will die.
It's tough not to see the parallels between the two stories, and when you do see them, it's even harder to not see The Force Unleashed as the more compelling tale, as it really plays with the concept of heroes and villains in some interesting ways. Having the player begin as a powerful Sith apprentice and seeing him work his way towards the light was awesome, and like many Star Wars games of the LucasArts era, the choice between light and dark is ultimately your own, with two drastically different endings playing out as a result. The light ending is canon, or was canon, thanks Disney, but the dark ending is worth seeing too, as it sets up the downloadable content for the game. More on that later. The gameplay in The Force Unleashed is heavily inspired by third-person character action games like Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, and the original God of War games. The combo-based hack-and-slash lightsaber combat feels good if a bit too RPG-inspired, with health bars over the enemies and the lightsaber functioning more like a sword than a lightsaber would, requiring multiple hits to kill most enemies. Starkiller is an extremely powerful Force user, and whenever you hold the right trigger on a controller or the right mouse button, you can grab whatever object or enemy the character model is facing, and can then throw it into other enemies, against a wall, over a cliff, into a ray shield. The surrounding architecture and your imagination are the only limits. LucasArts worked closely with ILM and several middleware technology companies in order to have the Force feel as close to what you see in the films as possible, and the results are often astounding. The physics of a ragdoll-bodied stormtrooper flailing in your grip before being flung against a wall or into a group of his comrades is a sight to behold. The feeling of wielding Force grip and push with such accuracy was amazing in 2008, and once you wrap your head around the character model guided targeting, it's still spectacular today. It would be greatly served by giving the player the ability to target with the camera rather than the player model, but using these powers still feels incredible. With Starkiller being trained as a Sith initially, you also have the ability to wield Force Lightning, and unlike most Star Wars games which lock this ability behind a dark side path, shocking Imperial troops to your heart's content doesn't hurt your ability to see the light side ending in the slightest. It's actually kinda cool to see what is a light side user, if you choose to play Starkiller as such, using a power that is so specifically tied to the dark side, and the way it's integrated into the lightsaber combos is pretty awesome. Certain combos allow you to imbue your saber with Force Lightning, causing both massive damage and a chance to stun. These Force powers, in addition to lightsaber combos and stat upgrades, are all mediated by a very light RPG progression system. As you kill enemies or find various holocrons scattered around the map, you will gain experience, which earns separate upgrade points for each of these progression paths. Most Force powers gain the ability to target more enemies at the same time. The combos add things like the aforementioned lightning to the lightsaber, or the ability to use powers while in the air, and the affinities are straightforward buffs to lightsaber damage, player health, the amount of health gained from fallen enemies, how fast your Force regenerates, and other basic boosts which should all seem familiar to any experienced gamer. Fallen enemies are the primary means by which you will regenerate health. Finding holocrons will also restore you to full health, but while they are common, they aren't nearly common enough to be relied upon for a primary source of healing. Luckily, unlike most character action games which only award health from enemies at random, every enemy killed in The Force Unleashed will restore a small amount of the player's health. This is a good thing, as even on the Sith Warrior difficulty which I play, the challenge in The Force Unleashed is rather significant. It's not at the level of something like Dark Souls, and even if it could be argued that it were on higher difficulties, it would be a very different type of challenge considering the resources you have at your disposal. But death will happen often, as enemy attacks do an incredible amount of damage. While Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Sekiro are concerned with management of small groups of enemies using very few resources due to your character's relative lack of power, The Force Unleashed almost resembles a bullet hell shooter, with a massive amount of ranged attacks being thrown at the player constantly, forcing you to evade liberally and systematically eliminate threats, often to give yourself enough time to use the Force to clear an obstacle. There is no one way to prioritize your targets though, as it could be argued that clearing out the nearly one-hit killable stormtroopers would be best, as it would result in fewer weapons firing at you. But if you do that, you also sacrifice what are effectively your own healing items. Personally, I found it best to first eliminate snipers, then purge troopers, which look nearly identical to the dark troopers from the OG Star Wars FPS Dark Forces, then mech units like AT-STs, while periodically taking out stormtroopers to both thin their herds and regain health. The boss battles in the game, in an odd move, pull the camera back for an uncontrollable cinematic wide angle, which does look cool, but also results in an inflated level of difficulty, as basic tasks like dodging become more difficult than they'd be if you retain control of the camera. Some fights are affected by this more than others, but it's always a shame to be killed by an awkward camera angle rather than a mistake you can learn from. The one thing nearly every combat engagement has in common is that they all make you feel like a badass Sith apprentice who's on an epic redemption arc, like Angel from the Buffyverse. Or if you choose, like a badass Sith apprentice who seems like he's on an epic redemption arc only to throw it away at the last minute, like Jaime Lannister. Prove me wrong, books. If you do choose the latter because you're a bad boy or bad girl, but I'm kind of into that and I'm trying to make a video here, so be gone from my thoughts, Temptress! You're treated to an ending which resembles the horror of Revenge of the Sith ending, but without the line delivery which ruins that scene. I won't ruin the specifics of how you get there, but Evil Starkiller effectively takes the place of Darth Vader, and 2 of the game's 3 DLCs run with this into a cool, what-if version of the original trilogy. The first DLC has Dark Apprentice Starkiller in search of R2-D2 on Tatooine during the first act of Star Wars. You visit Jabba's palace, find out how quickly Luke could have resolved the Rancor situation if he had a lightsaber, fight Boba Fett because why not, and eventually make your way to Mos Eisley where you face off with Obi-Wan as the Millennium Falcon narrowly escapes. This whole DLC was pretty cool, but it makes one of the same mistakes that The Last Jedi does and gives Force Ghost Obi-Wan the ability to interact with the physical world as an excuse for a two-stage boss battle. So if we're going to blame Rian Johnson or the lore specialist for being asleep at the wheel on that rule, we've got to at least address it happening in the pre-Disney world as well. I am tough, but I am fair. The next DLC skips forward a bit, but the opening text crawl reveals that events in this what-if universe panned out similarly to how they do in the canon timeline. The Death Star is destroyed and Luke is at the secret base on Hoth with the Rebel forces. This DLC doesn't quite have the location variety that the Tatooine DLC does, but it does a good job at feeling intense and engaging, with Starkiller looking almost like a hoodless Kylo Ren, a puzzle that involves throwing snowspeeders into a shield generator, and a showdown with the best character in contemporary fiction, Luke Skywalker. Both of the What If DLCs are absolutely worth playing, and they even make firing up the final mission of the main campaign in order to get the dark side ending worthwhile. There is a third DLC, and while it's cool to explore the Coruscant Jedi Temple, this one seems to occur within the main game and feels more like cut content than additional material. So maybe it would be best to play it in the middle of your playthrough? I'm not your master, you do what you want.
Whatever, I do what I want.
If you take the 5 minutes it will require to mod the game to run at 60 frames a second, or the additional 5 that it will take to get the game to display in 4K, Force Unleashed is to this day an absolutely stunning game. It can stand up proudly next to the upcoming Jedi Fallen Order despite being over a decade older. It's a testament to how fantastic the art direction in the game is, and a sight to behold that will have you feeling like you did the first time you saw Leia in the gold bikini. Or Han's devilish grin? It's good looking, okay? The game is comparable to Star Wars' most attractive people. If I haven't made it abundantly clear by now, I had an incredible time revisiting The Force Unleashed. It's a tad pricier than my previous Reloaded classic, Republic Commando, but I'm confident that if you're excited for Jedi Fallen Order, or if you're interested in what the origins of the Rebellion were like in the George Lucas universe, you'd be hard-pressed to find a better game to play than Star Wars The Force Unleashed. I was going to tackle the sequel in the same video, but I've been told that Longman is in fact bad, so